Saturday. The Knicks did take the regular season advantage 2-1 in a 3-game sample size. But 2 of those games were played before Trae Young was traded. And the last game these two teams played just a few weeks ago went to overtime. Here's Stephen A. yesterday on what could happen if the Knicks get bounced early.
Mike Brown is gone as the head coach. Karl Anthony Towns, likely Mikal Bridges, and who knows who the hell else is gone as New York Knickerbockers. That's the bottom line. You understand? It's just that simple. If you lose in the first round, to the Atlanta Hawks, I think heads are going to roll.
Oh, yeah, heads are definitely going to roll. Look, Tibbs was fired last year. Mike Brown was brought in with the expectation that the Knicks are going to go to the finals. If they fall short and they lose in the first round of the playoffs, what will the repercussions be? Wendy, you heard what Stephen A. had to say. What do you think?
I have an inconvenient truth. It's not just the first round. I think if they lose in the second round, even if that's against the favored Celtics, I think there's going to be massive repercussions. I'm not going to predict which individual people might get fired or get traded, but the Hawks will be a formidable first-round opponent. What I have been saying for the last few days is they're not really a 6 seed. They're a 6 seed because their record over the first 2 months of the season dragged them down. Over the last 2-3 months of the season, they really played more like a top 4 seed. This little maneuvering on the last day of the season where Orlando blew that game in Boston, and that enabled the Raptors to move up to number 5, that was bad news for the Knicks. The Raptors got dominated by the Knicks all year long. In my view, the Knicks have the hardest draw in the Eastern Conference. To have to potentially beat the Hawks, who are not a 6 seed, then potentially, obviously, Boston, then potentially Detroit or Cleveland, that is as hard of a stretch as they could go. And they go into it with the understanding that if they don't get to the conference finals, and quite frankly, Jim Dolan is on the record saying he believes this team should be in the finals, there will absolutely be repercussions. So forget about the Hawks and what happens there. Even if that would be an upset, Stephen A., that would be a significant upset, but it wouldn't drop me to the floor if the Hawks found a way to get 4 wins. I've seen crazier first-round upsets than that. This is a closer series than 3 versus 6. But forget about that. The bigger concern, if you're worried about staying in New York, if you're everybody wearing a Knicks jersey right now, is what happens if you can't beat the Celtics, who you beat 3 times in the regular season, you beat last year in the playoffs. Your ownership was like, I ain't talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo because I believe in this team. If that series is where they go out, Shea, there's still going to be massive, massive fallout.
Thanks.
I get where you're coming from. Here's what I would say. From a player perspective, no argument there, because James Dolan believes that they're good enough to get to the finals, blah, blah, blah. But he said this before Jason Tatum returned, okay? And I think that that's important. And I think he said that quote, if I remember correctly, Wendy, he said it before James Harden was acquired by Cleveland. So the combination of those two things, I think, play a factor, right? Because he said it before those things occurred. James Harden being acquired by Cleveland, Jason Tatum returning from the Achilles injury much, much sooner than anticipated. I think that gives him cause to pause when he's looking at this team if you're going up against one of those guys. Okay, not to say that you can't beat Cleveland, particularly how they struggle defensively, but it's a tough call. And if you lose to the Boston Celtics, there's no shame in that, okay? If you lose to the Atlanta Hawks, I mean, are you kidding me? Well, nobody thinking about them. I don't give a damn how good they've been the latter part of the season. You're not anticipating that a New York Knicks team built to contend for a championship is going home in the first round to Jalen Johnson or Dyson Daniels or C.J. McCollum. You ain't trying to hear that. You're just not trying to hear that. That happens. Heads gonna roll, in my estimation. Here's where it gets interesting, Shay, Wendy, and we have to pay attention to this. A lot of speculation when Tom Thibodeau was let go. Was it James Dolan who forced Leon Rose to make that call? Or was it Leon Rose who said, I think it's time for a change? If it was Leon Rose, Mike Brown, in my opinion, is gone if the New York Knicks lose in the first round to the Atlanta Hawks. He stays if it was Dolan's call, because Dolan is the one that forced the change from Tom Thibodeau. We know Tom Thibodeau can grate on you. We know he can wear on you. We know players, coaches, and everybody in between have implored him over the years, get a life, because all he did was eat, live, and breathe basketball. That's it. But the point is, the grit and the grind that the New York Knicks had at their disposal the previous 2 or 3 years was something to admire. Everybody that went up against the Knicks knew they were going to be in a dogfight night in and night out, because there was a little extra oomph that came from the New York Knicks that, quite frankly, we've questioned whether or not it has existed this year watching them. And this is a Knicks team that was top 6 offensively and defensively in terms of efficiency. And we still looked at them and said, something's missing in terms of their toughness, their grit, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, they have more of a bench. Yes, Mike Brown was brought there. You weren't anticipating he was going to be Tibbs. He was going to bring more offensively, though. And his personable skills was something that was supposed to work to sort of assuage the concerns or get along, player relations, all of this other stuff. But Tom Thibodeau, that grit, that grind, that fight that you saw from the New York Knicks, as a New York Knicks fan, let me be very clear. We grew to expect it. That's an expectation we have. And when it's missing, we notice. And we've noticed it's been missing this year. Again, you lose to Boston. Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown are champions. They're living in the conference finals. We get that part. You lose to Cleveland with Harden and Donovan Mitchell. Not great. Mobley, Allen, not great in terms of losing to them. Wouldn't be great, but somewhat understandable. Even Detroit, after the guts, the grit that you had to put forth in order to beat them in the first round last year. We get that too. The Atlanta Hawks, and this is not to be disrespectful to them. It's just that you ain't been there. You ain't been a part of the mix since you went to the conference finals a few years back in 2021. We're looking at the Atlanta Hawks. You didn't expect them to be somebody that was in the Knicks' way. If they send the Knicks home in the first round, change is coming. And I think it's going to be with the coach and several players.
So Mike Brown has not won a playoff series since 2012. You brought up 2021 when the Hawks were in the conference finals. That is when they most recently beat the Knicks. It was 4-1 in the first round of the playoffs. But now we look to the East and to the Celtics, because I think despite the Pistons being the 1 seed in the East, it does feel like the Celtics are the biggest threat in that conference. Which team is the biggest threat now to the Celtics in the East? Is it the Knicks or someone else, Wendy?
I think I'm very cognizant of not giving the Detroit Pistons enough attention for their magnificent season, including how beautifully they played after Cade Cunningham got hurt. And I recognize, Stephen A., that we at ESPN may be in Detroit for days on end for the conference finals where they would have home court advantage. So I'm a little bit wary about continuing to disregard them. However, I'm going to disregard them in this instance yet again, because I think that the Knicks are the team that the Celtics have to contend with most seriously. And that is simply because the Knicks have been constructed with the exact purpose of beating the Celtics. When the Knicks made their most crucial decisions about putting this roster together, it was in the wake of the Celtics winning the championship. That is why they invested so heavily in Mikal Bridges. That is why they invested so heavily in OG Anunoby in terms of what they paid him. Those players were brought in specifically to deal with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown. And they have had success. They've had success, obviously, in the playoffs last year and this year. I know they didn't play them together this year, but they still went 3-1. So the one thing you're looking at if you're a Knicks fan or in the Knicks organization is our team is primed to beat the best team in the East. And they're going to try to give them another chance, I think.
Here's the thing.